Hunger in the United States is an issue that affects millions of Americans, including some who are middle class, or who are in households where all adults are in work. Research from the USDA found that 14.9% of American households were food insecure during at least some of 2011, with 5.7% suffering from very low food security. Journalists and charity workers have reported further increased demand for emergency food aid during 2012 and 2013. The United States produces far more food than it needs for domestic consumption. Hunger within the U.S. is caused by some Americans having insufficient money to buy food for themselves or the families. Hunger is addressed by a mix of public and private food aid provision. Both types of aid have been expanding in the 21st century, with hunger relief efforts by the government growing faster than aid provided by civil society. Historically, the U.S. has been a world leader in reducing hunger. While precise comparative figures are not available, studies suggest that in the 18th century there was far less hunger in the United States than in the rest of the world. In the 19th and early 20th century, Western Europe began to catch up. After the outbreak of World War I, however, the U.S. was able to send tens of millions of tons of food to relieve severe hunger in Europe. This act was unprecedented in the world's history, and was the first of many substantial actions by the United States to relieve international hunger and poverty. In the later half of the 20th century, other advanced economies in Europe and Asia began to overtake the U.S. in terms of reducing hunger among their own populations. In 2011, a report presented in the New York Times found that among 20 economies recognized as advanced by the International Monetary Fund and for which comparative rankings for food security were available, the U.S. was joint worst. Nonetheless, in March 2013, the Global Food Security Index commissioned by DuPont ranked the U.S. number 1 for food affordability and overall food security. Causes. Hunger in the United States is caused by a complex combination of factors. There is not a single cause attributed to hunger, and there is much debate over who or what is responsible for the prevalence of hunger in the United States. However, researchers most commonly focus on the link between hunger and poverty. The federal poverty level is defined as the minimum amount of income that a household needs to be able to afford housing, food, and other basic necessities. As of the year 2014, the federal poverty level for a family of 4 was $23,850. Based on her research on poverty, Pennsylvania State University economic geographer Amy Glassmeyer claims that when individuals live at, slightly above, or below the poverty line, unexpected expenses contribute to individuals reducing their food intake. Medical emergencies have a significant impact on poor families due to the high cost of medical care and hospital visits. Also, urgent car repairs reduce a family's ability to provide food, since the issue must be addressed in order to allow individuals to travel to and from work. Although income cannot be labeled as the sole cause of hunger, it plays a key role in determining if people possess the means to provide basic needs to themselves and the family. The loss of a job reflects a core issue that contributes to hunger: employment insecurity. People who live in areas with higher unemployment rates and who have a minimal or very low amount of liquid assets are shown to be more likely to experience hunger or food insecurity. The complex interactions between a person's job status, income and benefits, and the number of dependents they must provide for, influence the impact of hunger on a family. Despite research on the correlation between poverty and hunger, comparison of data from the December supplement of the 2009 Current Population Survey illustrated that poverty is not a direct causation of hunger. Of all household incomes near the federal poverty line, 65% were identified as food secure, while 20% of households above the poverty line with an income-to-poverty ratio of approximately 2 were labeled as food insecure. The income-to-poverty ratio is a common measure used when analyzing poverty. In this particular case, it means that these households' total family income was approximately twice that of the federal poverty line for the specific family size. As this data illustrates, the factors which contribute to hunger are interrelated and complex. Impact of hunger. Children in 2011, 16.7 million children lived in food-insecure households, about 35% more than 2007 levels, though only 1.1% of U.S. children, or 845,000, saw reduced food intake or disrupted eating patterns at some point during the year, and most cases were not chronic. Almost 16 million children lived in food-insecure households in 2012. Schools throughout the country had 21 million children participate in a free or reduced lunch program, and 11 million children participate in a free or reduced breakfast program. The extent of American youth facing hunger is clearly shown through the fact that 47% of SNAP participants are under the age of 18. The states with the highest rate of food-insecure children were North Dakota, Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts as of 2012. Children who experience hunger have an increase in both physical and psychological health problems. Although there is not a direct correlation between chronic illnesses and hunger among children, the overall health and development of children decreases with exposure to hunger and food insecurity. Children are more likely to get ill and require a longer recovery period when they don't consume the necessary amount of nutrients. In regards to academics, children who experience hunger perform worse in school on both mathematics and reading assessments. Children who consistently start the day with a nutritious breakfast have an average increase of 17.5% on the standardized math scores than children who regularly miss breakfast. Behavioral issues arise in both the school environment and in the children's ability to interact with peers of the same age. This is identified by both parental and teacher observations and assessments. Hunger takes a psychological toll on youth and negatively affects the mental health. Their lack of food contributes to the development of emotional problems and causes children to have visited with a psychiatrist more often than the sufficiently fed peers. Research shows that hunger plays a role in late youth and young adult depression and suicidal ideation. It was identified as a factor in 5.6% of depression and suicidal ideation cases in a Canadian longitudinal study. Elderly-like children, the elderly population of the United States, are vulnerable to the negative consequences of hunger. Senior citizens are considered to be of 65 years of age or older. In 2011, there was an increase of 9% in the number of seniors facing the threat of hunger from 2009. This resulted in a population of 8.8 million seniors who are facing this threat. However, a total of 1.9 million seniors were dealing with hunger at this time. The organization Meals on Wheels reports that Mississippi, New Mexico, Arkansas, and Texas are the states with the top rates of seniors facing the threat of hunger respectively. Due to food insecurity and hunger, the elderly population experiences negative effects on their overall health and mental well-being. Not only are they more prone to reporting heart attacks, other cardiac conditions, and asthma, but food insecurity secure seniors are also 60% more likely to develop depression. Ethnicity minority groups are affected by hunger to far greater extent than the Caucasian population in the United States. Based on research conducted by Washington University in St. Louis on food insufficiency by race, 11.5% of whites experience food insufficiency compared to 22.98% of African Americans, 16.67% of American Indians, and 26.66% of Hispanics when comparing each racial sample group. Feeding America reports that 29% of all Hispanic children and 38% of all African American children received emergency food assistance in 2010. White children received more than half the amount of emergency food assistance, with 11% receiving aid. However, Hispanic households are less likely to have interaction with SNAP than other ethnic groups and received assistance from the program. Geographic regions. There exist distinct differences between how hunger is experienced in the rural and urban settings. Rural counties experience high food insecurity rates twice as often as urban counties. It has been reported that approximately 3 million rural households are food insecure, which is equal to 15% of the total population of rural households. This reflects the fact that 7.5 million people in rural regions live below the federal poverty line. This poverty in rural communities is more commonly found in southern states. In addition, rural areas possess fewer grocery stores than urban regions with similar population density and geography. However, rural areas have more supermarkets than similar urban areas. Research has discovered that rural counties' poverty level and racial composition does not have a direct, significant association to supermarket access in the area. Urban areas, by contrast, have shown through countless studies that an increase in the African American population correlates to fewer supermarkets, and the ones available require residents to travel a longer distance. Despite these differences, both city and rural areas experience a higher rate of hunger than suburban areas. Living in regions that considered food deserts can prevent individuals from easily accessing healthy food markets and grocery stores due to lack of availability. Studies have shown that within these food deserts there exists distinct racial disparities compared to Caucasian neighborhoods. Predominantly African American neighborhoods have been reported to have half the amount of chain supermarkets available to residents. Despite racial differences, the vast majority of individuals living in food deserts struggle with transportation to food sources. Since these areas are low-income neighborhoods, many families may be unable to have the financial means to easily and regularly access supermarkets or grocery stores that tend to be located far from the home. This acts as an additional obstacle individuals must face when trying to provide food for the family and prevent hunger. Fighting hunger. Public sector hunger relief. As of 2012, the United States government spent about $50 billion annually on 10 programs, mostly administered by the Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion, which in total deliver food assistance to 1 in 5 Americans. The largest and only universal program is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as the Food Stamp Program. In the 2012 fiscal year, $74.6 billion in food assistance was distributed. As of December 2012, 47.8 million Americans were receiving on average $133.73 per month in food assistance. Despite efforts to increase uptake, an estimated 15 million eligible Americans are still not using the program. Historically, about about 40 million Americans were using the program in 2010, while in 2001 18 million were claiming food stamps. After cutbacks to welfare in the early 1980s and late 1990s, private sector aid had begun to overtake public aid, such as food stamps, as the fastest-growing form of food assistance. Although the public sector provided much more aid in terms of volume, this changed in the early 21st century. The public sector's rate of increase in the amount of food aid dispensed again overtook the private sector's. President George W. Bush's administration undertook bipartisan efforts to increase the reach of the food stamp program, increasing its budget and reducing both the stigma associated with applying for aid and barriers imposed by red tape. Cuts in the food stamp program came into force in November 2013, impacting an estimated 48 million poorer Americans, including 22 million children. Commentators have stated hardship could worsen if a new farm bill is passed. The version currently backed by the Democrats has a further $4 billion worth of cuts, while the version backed by Republicans would cut food stamps by $40 billion. Most other programs are targeted at particular types of citizen. The largest of these is the school lunch program, which in 2010 helped feed 32 million children a day. The second largest is the school breakfast program, feeding 16 million children in 2010. The next largest is the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants and children, which provide food aid for about 9 million women and children in 2010. A program that is neither universal nor targeted is Emergency Food Assistance Program. This is a successor to the Federal Surplus Relief Corporation, which used to distribute surplus farm production direct to poor people. Now the program works in partnership with the private sector, by delivering the surplus produce to food banks and other civil society agencies. Private sector hunger relief. The oldest type of formal hunger relief establishment used in the United States is believed to be the almshouse, but these are no longer in existence. In the 21st century, hunger relief agencies run by civil society include food pantries are the most numerous food aid establishment found within the United States. The food pantry hands out packages of grocery to the hungry. Unlike soup kitchens, they invariably give out enough food for several meals, which is to be consumed off the premises. A related establishment is the food closet, which serves a similar purpose to the food pantry, but will never be a dedicated building. Instead, a food closet will be a room within a larger building like a church, a community center. Food closets can be found in rural communities too small to support a food pantry. Food pantries often have procedures to prevent unscrupulous people taking advantage of them, such as requiring registration. Soup kitchens, along with similar establishments like food kitchens and meal centers, provide hot meals for the hungry, and the second most common type of food aid agency in the U.S. Unlike food pantry, these establishments usually provide only a single meal per visit, but they have the advantage for the end user of generally providing food with no questions asked. The food bank is the third most common type of food aid agency. While some will give food direct to the hungry, food banks in the U.S. generally provide a warehouse-like function, distributing food to frontline agencies such as food pantries and soup kitchens. Food rescue organizations also perform a warehouse-like function, distributing food to frontline orgs, though they are less common and tend to operate on a smaller scale than do food banks, whereas food banks may receive supplies from large growers, manufacturers, supermarkets, and the federal government. Rescue orgs typically retrieve food from sources such as restaurants along with smaller shops and farms. Together, these civil society food assistance establishments are sometimes called the Emergency Food Assistance System. In 2010, an estimated 37 million Americans received food from the EFAS. However, the amount of aid it applies is much less than the public sector, with an estimate made in the year 2000 suggesting that the EFAS is able to give out only about $9.50 worth of food per person per month, according to a comprehensive government survey completed in 2002. About 80% of emergency kitchens and food pantries, over 90% of food banks, and all known food rescue organizations were established in the U.S. after 1981, with much of the growth occurring after 1991.